The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, cream-colored and elegant, with Sophie's name embossed in shimmering gold lettering. Her hands trembled as she turned it over, noticing the return address, a venue in Meadowbrook, just outside the city. Strangely familiar, but nothing could prepare her for what came next. When she opened the card, time seemed to stop. There, printed in elegant script, was a name that sent shockwaves through her entire body: Marcus Westbrook, the groom, the man who once held her hand and promised her forever, the man who walked away 2 years ago, leaving her heart in pieces. Welcome back to Heartfelt Chronicles, where we bring you stories that linger in your mind long after they end. Today's story is about courage, closure, and the unexpected. Sophie sat frozen in her small apartment, the invitation trembling in her hands. Her best friend Jasmine had delivered it that morning with a careful expression, knowing exactly what it would do to her. "Why would he send this to me?" Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. The memories flooded back instantly. Marcus bringing her coffee during late-night study sessions, his laugh that could light up any room, the way he'd hold her close and whisper plans about their future. They'd been perfect together, or so she thought. 2 years ago, everything shattered. Marcus had asked for space, said he needed to find himself. She'd waited, believing with every fiber of her being that he'd come back. She'd put her life on hold, declined dates from other men, kept his favorite coffee mug in her cabinet. But he never returned. And now this invitation, was it cruelty, guilt, or some twisted attempt at closure? Sophie had convinced herself she'd healed. She'd thrown herself into her work as a graphic designer, traveled to 3 countries, even tried dating again. But seeing his name in gold print cracked open something she'd carefully sealed away. That night she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every kiss, every broken promise. The pain she thought had faded was suddenly fresh, raw, overwhelming. For 5 days Sophie debated with herself. The invitation sat on her kitchen counter, mocking her indecision. "Don't go," Jasmine advised over coffee. "Why put yourself through that?" But another voice inside Sophie, quieter but stronger, kept whispering, "You need this. You need to see him one last time. You need to let go for real." She made her decision on Friday night. She would attend, not for Marcus, but for herself. She needed to look him in the eyes, see him happy with someone else, and finally close that chapter of her life. Saturday morning, she stood in front of her closet for an hour. Finally, she chose an emerald green dress, elegant, simple, confident. The kind of dress that said, "I'm doing just fine without you," even if her heart was screaming otherwise. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Stronger, older, changed. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "You're not the same girl he left behind." Meadowbrook Garden was breathtaking. Golden fields stretched endlessly under a perfect blue sky. White chairs lined the aisle, and soft classical music drifted through the air. Everything was beautiful, romantic, perfect. Everything Sophie had once imagined for herself. She arrived early, blending into the crowd of guests. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Then she saw him. Marcus stood across the garden in a charcoal grey suit, laughing with groomsmen. He looked different, more mature, more confident. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes, were exactly the same. When their eyes met across the space, his smile faltered. He excused himself and walked toward her, each step feeling like an eternity. "Sophie," he said softly, as if her name was fragile. "You came." "You invited me," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. An awkward silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they'd never said. "I wanted you to know," Marcus began, then paused. "I'm sorry, for everything. For how I ended things, for disappearing." Sophie nodded, fighting back the tears threatening to spill. "I know," she managed. "But sorry doesn't change the past, does it?" Before he could respond, wedding music began. The ceremony was starting. Sophie found a seat in the back, surrounded by strangers. She watched as the bride, Elena, walked down the aisle. She was beautiful, graceful, radiant, everything a bride should be. When she reached Marcus, his face lit up with pure joy. Sophie felt the jealousy rise like bile in her throat. That should have been her. Those should have been her vows. That should have been her happy ending. But then something unexpected happened. As Marcus and Elena exchanged vows, as they promised to love and cherish each other, Sophie felt something shift inside her. The anger began to dissolve. The pain started to transform. She realized, sitting there among celebrating strangers, that she didn't want to be standing at that altar. Not with Marcus, not anymore. She wanted something different, something real, something that didn't require her to hold on to someone who'd already let go. During the reception, Sophie slipped away to the quiet garden behind the venue. String lights twinkled overhead, and the cool evening air filled her lungs. She closed her eyes and just breathed. "You look beautiful tonight." She turned to find Marcus standing there, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. "Thank you," she said simply, "and you look happy, genuinely happy." He nodded, stepping closer. "I am. But Sophie, I want you to know, what we had, it was real. You taught me how to love." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of release. "And you taught me how to let go," she said softly. "I didn't know that was a lesson I needed, but it was." They stood there for a long moment. Two people who once shared everything, now sharing nothing but memories and respect. "Goodbye, Marcus," Sophie finally whispered. He smiled, sad, grateful, understanding. "Goodbye, Sophie." Then he walked away, back to his bride, back to his new life, back to a future that no longer included her. Sophie stood under the twinkling lights, feeling something profound settle in her chest. The pain hadn't vanished completely, but it had transformed into something else. Strength, wisdom, peace. She realized that love doesn't always end with a wedding or a forever. Sometimes it ends with understanding. Sometimes it ends with two people releasing each other with grace. And that kind of ending is beautiful too. As she walked to her car that night, her steps felt lighter. The weight she'd been carrying for 2 years had finally lifted. She wasn't the woman who'd been left behind anymore. She was the woman who'd chosen to let go. Back in her apartment, Sophie kicked off her heels, poured herself a glass of wine, and looked out at the city lights below. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't see Marcus's face when she closed her eyes. She saw her own future, unclear, unwritten, full of possibility. She smiled at her reflection in the window. "Thank you, Marcus," she whispered to the night. "Thank you for teaching me that goodbye can be a gift. That wedding wasn't an ending, it was Sophie's beginning. And sometimes that's the most beautiful kind of love story, the one where you fall in love with yourself again. Remember, sometimes the most important goodbye is the one that sets you free. See you in the next story.